Fog is back, baby. So about a year ago, I made a video about these rotatable camera collar thingamabobbers. I compared the original Atoll versus the small rig and pretty much ended up concluding that while the Atoll was a novel idea, the execution was just a little bit better on the small rig. The original Atoll had some stability issues, but Silence Corner, the original maker of these rotatable camera collar thingies, has since updated their product to address some of the issues that I brought up in that video. But before we get to reviewing, we need to take this time lapse because the fog is rolling in, the light's gonna come out pretty soon. 2-second intervals for time lapsing. Hopefully we get some cool fog shots this morning. Holy cannoli, guys. Check out the fog that's behind us. Like, that's a lot of fog. Whew. It's like the first fog since like the summertime, so I'm like enjoying like the cool, crisp, fresh air. It was alright. It was cool. Cool to see fog again. Cool to feel the cold air. But let's go to like a less trafficked spot to kind of talk more about this Atoll thingy-majig. Oh man. Rookie mistake. Should have kept the time lapse rolling because by the time I packed everything up, walked down here, clouds cleared. The light came out on the mountain. All right, so this guy here is the Atoll S Plus. It's Silence Corner's updated version of their original Atoll product that claims to address some of the issues that I brought up, especially like with stability, you know, in the last video that I made about a year ago. Now, if you want the short answer, yes, the Atoll Plus does fix the stability issue. It's much more stable than the original Atoll, at least when used on these bigger Sony cameras. But if you don't want to take my word for it, or if you don't trust me, or if you're just a nerd like me and wants to dive into like the nitty-gritty details, then stay tuned because we're going to put this guy to the test against the original Atoll, as well as the small rig, which I mentioned in the previous video. All right, so what's new on the Atoll Plus? Well, they designed it in this nice black design, and specifically for the Sony version, they've added kind of this orange trim on the rim of the Atoll, which is appreciated because it matches the color a lot more than the silver Atoll. Now, they do make a black version of the original Atoll, but this silver doesn't look the best on like black camera bodies. It works well with like the A7C with its silver trim, so that's what I use this one for, but it just never really matched the original black, bigger Sony mirrorless camera bodies. Now, when compared to the small rig, of course, the small rig always makes their stuff just regular black colored, but you know, it didn't really have anything special like the fancy orange trim to really match the Sony. Another thing that they added on here is a improved knob system to make it easier to operate. So on the original Atoll, we had kind of this, hopefully you guys can see, this small, teeny tiny little round knob with some pretty good knurling that allowed us to kind of operate it. And the small rig, unfortunately, even though this one was more stable, this knob had so much less of that knurling for grip, so it was very, very difficult to kind of turn and operate. And yeah, on the newer Atoll Plus, it has like a nice aggressive knob that's more of like a tab, I would say, but it just makes operating it and flipping the camera back and forth so much easier. Another thing that they added on the Atoll Plus is a little notch by the lens release button that allows you to depress that button a little bit easier to release the lens so that it's easy to change lenses. Now, if we compare it to the original Atoll here, you can see that there's really no knob. It's just one big circle. So sometimes, you know, you had to kind of jam your finger in there to depress the buttons to release the lens. And then on the small rig, again, even though it was more stable, they gave you kind of like this push button here. Hopefully you guys can see that push button there. But this push button would activate a mechanism behind the unit to depress the button, and then you'd be able to take out your lens and change it. The only problem that I noticed over time with the small rig, especially because I used it in seascape situations a lot, is that sometimes this button would get jammed. So, you know, occasionally you would run into the issue where you didn't want that button to be pressed, but your lens would actually be loose. So, you know, that's a little bit of an issue that I had with the small rig. And the last thing that they added, and the most important thing that they added in my opinion, is 2 new stability little stoppers on the collar itself, and that adds extra stability to the device. If we take a look at the kind of original Atoll, you can see this is the angle kind of from behind, but you've got nothing on the top part of the collar itself, but you do have 2 stability thingies down there on the bottom. But what made the small rig more stable was not only do you have kind of a bigger stability stopper there on the bottom, but you also get these 2 up here. So, you know, that's really what made the small rig more stable than the Atoll. So they stole that from small rig, just as small rig stole the idea for these rotatable lens collar thingies from Silence Corner. The sun just came out, it's super bright, but so we're gonna obviously test the stability of each of these camera collar thingies. So we're gonna take off the mid-range. We're gonna slap on the 100 to 400, the big boy here. So typically with the 100 to 400, you would shoot it like this. You would put the camera and mount it with the lens collar, and functionally it's almost the same as the Atoll. It just makes things more balanced when on the gimbal, not on the gimbal, but when on the tripod. So you can kind of rotate the lens back and forth. But for this test, we're not going to be testing the lens collar. So we'll move this guy kind of out of the way here. We're going to be testing the collar on the tripod itself. So what I'll do is I'll take some video of the beautiful mountain peak back there so you can really see how stable it is. We're going to take all of it on the Alpha 1 8K 30 frames per second so you can really see how stable each thing is. And by default, I believe my optical stabilization is on the 100 to 400, and then steady shot will also be enabled on the Alpha 1, just to kind of see how the camera will compensate in these types of situations. Because in my opinion, I feel like if you're going to be shooting on the long telephoto ends, even for landscape photography, ideally you'd like to have those features turned on to just kind of help stabilize the shot, even if you're shooting on a tripod. But yeah, let's do the test here with all those different lens, camera, collar, thingy-mabobbers. Our movements of our camera and our tripod are going to be more and more exaggerated, so you can really see kind of the difference in how stable each of these camera collars are. But what I'm not going to do is try to like forcibly shake it. What I am going to do is, after I hit the record button here, is just press the shutter button, because really that movement of you pressing the shutter button would kind of be similar to how you would take that shot. So you would push the shutter button, wait maybe like your 2 seconds, and then take your shot. And then we'll also rotate the camera like such. So you can kind of get the same vertical shot, sense of if the stability is different with the camera in vertical orientation. Alright, so I'll put the comparison clips up on top of this video as well so you guys can see for yourself. But by far, the worst performer out of the three was the original Atoll. Like I mentioned in my previous video, there are some stability issues with this guy, but the good news is with the Atoll Plus, Silence Corner did fix some of that stability issues, so the camera shake is not as prominent when using the updated Atoll Plus version. The best performer though, by far, has to have been the small rig. I think just the bigger kind of lens camera collar, design, as well as this massive kind of bottom stability plate here, or stability pad here, just, adds to that like extra sense of security and stability. So if you are indeed looking for like the most stable, rotatable thingy-majig, then the small rig definitely still is the king. However, there are a couple of things about the small rig that I don't like, which has prevented me from kind of using this as kind of my main rotatable camera thingy. I actually have been using the Atoll Plus for a while now. It's basically lived on my Sony Alpha 1 and I really love it. But the downsides of the small rig that I was talking about is just generally the size. It's pretty big, bulky. You've got this long camera plate on the bottom. Your collar only is limited to two positions. So you've got horizontal and vertical, which is pretty much all that you need. But what makes the Atoll S nice is that look how small and compact it is. You've only got this kind of small, teeny tiny little base plate that clips onto the base of the camera. And in addition to that, when you rotate it, you can actually rotate it vertically. So if you are somebody that likes to do kind of like those inverted shots with your tripod, this is, a lot more beneficial to you than the small rig, but it also allows the camera to store a little bit better inside of the camera bag. So, the size, the weight, the packability of the Atoll, with a very, very slight, a very small amount of compromise when it comes to stability in comparison to the small rig. I think those trade-offs are generally pretty worth it in my opinion, but really it's up to you. If you're somebody who really prioritizes stability over everything, then still get the small rig, but you just have to live with some of the downsides of the bigger size and weight. Another thing is that if I wanted to use the small rig with a Peak Design capture clip, I'd have to screw in a capture clip onto the bottom, so it would make like the attachment process and detachment process of the small rig like so much more of a hassle, whereas the built-in plate on both the original Atoll as well as the Atoll Plus, I gotta do that stupid makeup artist trend thing. They come with a built-in Peak Design plate, so it works with the Peak Design capture clip, and it just makes my life so much easier to, if I ever have to like detach it to like, let's say, put it into an underwater housing or whatnot, it's just one screw to undo, whereas like the small rig has two screws that I have to undo if I want to break down my whole entire rig. But using the Atoll Plus hasn't been without its downsides. So of course the stability component, knowing that it's not as stable as the small rig, means that I just have to be more mindful when shooting long exposures or telephoto shots with it, or telephoto-ish shots with it. I have to be less pushy on the trigger on the camera, and just be more willing to use a 2-second timer if I need to. The other thing is that I had to adjust the whole entire setup of my ball head or my panoramic head, because the Atoll is so small and compact. Let me just kind of show you guys the difference of these guys here. You can, if I put these guys side by side, you can see that the small rig has kind of a bigger plate that attaches to the ball head. So rotating the camera on the tripod is no issue. I gotta try and do this here, filming with two cameras. But the way that the small rig attached onto the camera, your tripod plate or your Arca Swiss plate had to be parallel to the length of your camera. Basically, you slap in your tripod plate like that, and then now you're free to kind of rotate the camera as you see fit. The plate on the small rig is wider on the long end, so if you were to flip your Arca Swiss plate the other way, you wouldn't be able to fit it in the in the Arca Swiss plate. So it's really a one-way street. You have to mount all of your Arca Swiss plates with with the clamp parallel to your camera. On the original Atoll, you kind of had the opposite issue. You were only allowed to mount the device onto your camera, onto your Arca Swiss plate, where the angle of the Arca Swiss plate is now perpendicular or at a 90-degree angle to your camera. So because it was longer, you're only allowed to mount it in that one direction. They did fix it somewhat on the Atoll Plus. You can now mount the camera in both directions. You can mount it perpendicular with your Arca Swiss plate, or you can mount it parallel with your Arca Swiss plate. But the problem is that because the Atoll is so compact, it's such a small and compact device, it doesn't give you as much separation between your camera and your plate as the small rig does. If you were to mount it parallel like this, your body would end up bumping your Arca Swiss plate, or it can end up bumping your Arca Swiss plate because you don't have that clearance that the small rig gives you. So basically the adjustment that I had to make was I had to adjust all of my Arca Swiss clamps to now function perpendicular to the camera. So that way I have to mount it kind of far back on the clamp, and then I'm able to kind of freely rotate the camera. Now it's not a huge issue because a lot of the times I know what angle I want to go with already. So by default, before I even put the camera onto the tripod, I already have the collar rotated the exact way that I want it to. But if you're somebody that likes to have the freedom to rotate between different compositions, just be mindful that the orientation of your Arca Swiss clamp is going to have to change if you're going to be switching to the Atoll like me, especially if you're coming from the small rig where you got all of this space of clearance that the collar gave you. The Atoll just has a couple of minor things that you have to adjust for if you are going to be using it as your main rotatable camera thingy-majig. Now, I want to add a couple of more disclaimers for the original Atoll. I know that both my previous video and this video kind of roasted the original Atoll for stability issues, and I think when using it on these bigger Sony mirrorless camera bodies, they do definitely have really bad stability issues. But what I've noticed was that with the smaller Sony camera bodies like the A7C, the ZV-E1, because those bodies are smaller, I think, the stability issues are not as huge of a deal. So you can kind of get away with using these guys if you own some of those smaller Sony mirrorless camera bodies. So I've got the original Atoll on the smaller mirrorless Sony bodies, the ZV-E1, and I think it's just due to the nature of the size of the body that makes it kind of less susceptible to that shake. you can see there's a little bit of that shake, especially when we're in horizontal orientation. But when we flip to vertical, I'm not sure what it is about it, but you can kind of see the shake is just slightly less. You know, it's more stable than if I were to put the original Atoll on the bigger Sony mirrorless camera bodies. The other thing that you may have also seen me use the original Atoll for is using it with my Nikon, with the Z7 Mark II. Even though it's not officially rated for the Nikon Z7 Mark II, the way that it's positioned on the Nikon actually makes it pretty stable. You can see that the bottom plate of the Atoll kind of sits right on the adapter, the E-mount to Nikon Z lens adapter. So it actually works really well, even though it looks funky because it's a silver design with a black camera body. You know, if you don't really care about looks, but you're using the Sony lenses on the Nikon camera bodies, it actually works really well, and it's pretty stable. I don't know if you guys can see. It still has a little bit of that shake, but it's not as exaggerated like on the Sony bodies for some reason. So yeah, that's my little disclaimer. I still do use the original Atoll, but just not on my main camera body, the Alpha 1. Alright, so just wrapping things up, the Atoll Plus does fix some of the stability issues that I noticed on the original Atoll. So if you are shooting some of these bigger Sony mirrorless camera bodies, the Atoll Plus is definitely a big upgrade from the original Atoll. If you are someone that obsesses with stability, the small rig is definitely the way to go. You just have to be able to deal with the bigger bulk, heft, and weight. But I think the Atoll Plus strikes a nice balance between size, weight, stability, portability. It fits nicely in the camera bag, doesn't take up that much space, but there are those adjustments that you have to make to, like, let's say your Arca Swiss clamp and those type of things. But overall, really like the update that Silence Corner made to the device. It gets a nice thumbs up approval from me. Anyways, if you like this type of content, this travel, vacation, a little bit of photography, gear, education, make sure you hit that like button, comment below, and subscribe. If you aren't ready, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.